Hello, welcome again to Sports a Lot, going through all the week's sports news with Martyn Ziegler from The Times, Tariq, Panja from The New York Times, myself, Rob Harris from Sky News. And, of course, we're always welcoming your feedback, but we need to know where you are now. Not as many people might be on X these days, so we're on a couple of new platforms. You can search for us, Sport Unlocked, on LinkedIn now.
Is this a business pitch?
Well, I suppose it does mean that when you're searching for your next job, you can check out our latest pod, which is all good.
And we're also on Substack, but don't expect some subscription newsletters from us.
There's so many platforms now. Substack is another one, and I think are we going to be doing gramophone record podcasts for our elderly listeners?
Well, some updates on facts might be welcome by some listeners. But Tariq, you've been out in Paris this week in quite a crazy event under the Eiffel Tower. So they've certainly gone for a scenic location for a press conference about a quite iconic player.
Yeah, a very French player, so perhaps that's why they chose the location. And in a week where his team, Real Madrid, were beaten by Arsenal 3-0, 2 days later, Kylian Mbappé and his family launched a phalanx of lawyers in this hotel to announce a series of cases against Paris Saint-Germain, ostensibly about a €55 million payment. They think they are owed since last February. They said, right, we're going public now. It's been more than a year. But it's extraordinary. Massive club in France, owned by Qatar, against this iconic Frenchman. I've never seen anything quite like this.
I suppose everybody knows they parted with some sort of bitter feelings on both sides. He had sort of signed an extension of his deal, but then left on a free transfer, so they missed out on a huge transfer fee. So just try and break down a bit what is at stake here.
So we all remember that summer of 2022, won't he move to Real Madrid? Emmanuel Macron, the French president, even getting involved and saying, look, stay in Paris, Kylian, stay in Paris. The World Cup is coming at the end of the year. And he did. He signed that contract, like you said, this extension. And then we had him pictured waving a shirt with 2025 on it. But Kylian Mbappé ended up leaving in 2024 and for a free transfer. And this is the crux of this. Behind the scenes, the summer before, he told PSG he was leaving. They froze him out of the team, essentially. They didn't take him on a tour to Japan. There was a lot of pandemonium and drama. And he was eventually allowed to come back into the team. And the background to this is, behind the scenes, there was almost a gentleman's agreement. That's the way PSG look at it. Not a written contract, where Kylian Mbappé said, look, if I do go on a free transfer, I'll give back this sum of money, which to him was worth €55 million gross. Overall, this is almost 100 million in taxes and everything else. Or he will sign an extension and PSG would sell him for, around the 180 million euros they paid Monaco for. But in the event none of this happened, Kylian Mbappé left for Real Madrid, and there has been this acrimony that's been bubbling over for a year. And now, honestly, it exploded incredibly with these cases, one after the other. They announced almost 5 or 6 different cases in different forums against Paris Saint-Germain.
How much political intrigue do we think was behind this? Because Florentino Perez, backer of the Super League, still of age 22, signing a player from Paris Saint-Germain, owned by Nasser Al-Khelaifi, who became boss of the European Club Association in the fallout from the collapsed Super League as well, also wanting to elevate the status of PSG and consign to losing the biggest star to the kings of European football.
Yeah, it's a good point there. And, these two polar opposites in football politics, you described it really well there, Rob. You've got, weirdly, PSG is almost like the establishment team now, given the proximity to UEFA, Nasser Al-Khelaifi running the European Club Association, and Real Madrid still pushing, as you said, for a Super League and outside. And there's Kylian Mbappé in amongst all of that, being pushed from one end to the other. But, also it feels it's all about money. And the fact is, PSG's claims about agreements, gentlemen's agreements, but there was no contract signed. And we've seen before loads of contracts for deals that have not been signed, whether you're buying a club or moving a player. If a contract isn't signed, is there a contract? And that's the crux of this. The lawyers for Mbappé, it's pretty simple. If you have an employment contract, you should pay that money. He never signed any changes. He didn't, whatever he might have said or whatever they might have kind of agreed to over email, there's no signed contract. So here we are. But for football fans, it's more than, I think, just this idea of this player, millionaire, multi-millionaire football player asking for this money, because the repercussions could be much bigger. So these lawyers, they've also written to the French Football Federation to block PSG from appearing in next season's Champions League, for example. Why? Because they're saying there is a clause in UEFA's financial club licensing rules that if you have unpaid wages, you can't get a license to play next year's Champions League. And that's going to be interesting, isn't it? Because where else does Nasser El Khalifi sit? He sits on the UEFA Executive Committee, doesn't he? And being Media Group is a big partner of UEFA. So this thing is really sprawling. And like I said earlier, I haven't seen anything like this.
So this is effectively a claim for unpaid wages. Was this a sort of bonus that was meant to be paid at the end of the year, or because it's a bit strange that this sort of such a huge figure is outstanding when he leaves the club? I mean, most people get paid wages every month.
This is a number that includes bonuses, signing on contracts, and partly some salary. This also highlights what the best players get in addition to their like weekly wage. Essentially, there's all these other little bits and pieces, but it adds up to a huge number. According to these guys, they stopped paying Kylian Mbappé last February when he was still a player with the team, and they said, why has it taken them a year to come public in this way? They said they understood losing a great player like Kylian Mbappé can't be easy to digest for Paris Saint-Germain, for the owners, and they've given him that time. I'm not sure that's true. There was another couple of eye-rolling moments for me. They also said they're not really doing it just for Kylian Mbappé. They're doing it for all footballers and also for the French state. Why all footballers? They said, look, if he doesn't get this money, another club would do this to another player, perhaps someone who's not as well resourced, someone who can't get 4 lawyers like Kylian Mbappé and can't take them to court and keep going in the way Kylian Mbappé has if they stop paying his wages. And why the French state? They say, look, the 55 million is a gross amount. Kylian would only get about 24, 25 million of this, or 28 million, and the rest will go in tax. And the 55 million would also mean PSG would have to pay 40 odd million in tax. So the French state is losing out here, which, so we're doing it for the French people, are you? I think that's a bit of a stretch.
Could be an impact on PSG's FFP compliance if they had to make this payment, although it would be spread out surely over several years.
That's, again, a really good point. And why do we have FFP? One reason is to make sure clubs don't lose money. But from this competitive balance point, as you say, it's quite interesting, because they pointed out that the money they owe Kylian Mbappé is the annual budget of another League One club, a team that played in the Champions League this year, Brest. So it's not an insignificant sum when you think about how football teams are managed.
Well, we've got Mbappe's team saying they're going on the attack. Paris Saint-Germain calling it another fantastic story from a parallel universe and saying it should be dealt with at the Labour Chamber, this, and saying he's bringing the claim because he's not an employee like any others, but PSG is saying he is an employer like any others. This is just like any other person in a job where there's a dispute over pay.
Yeah, the Labour court issue is a very interesting one as well. Eventually, yesterday, the Labour lawyer, one of the four lawyers, she said they will take it to the Labour court, and the Labour court will hear very interesting things. The other reason why the Labour court might not be the first forum for the player is that it takes years. It could take 5, 6, 7 years for something like this to unwind in a Labour court, and a footballer's career, I guess, is quite short. But to be fair, Kylian Mbappé is not going to be short of a few quid. PSG, they think, are taking it to the Labour court, want it to be heard in the Labour court, because it buys more time. PSG would rather just have an amicable conversation and they settle.
One of the claims is the fact that Mbappé believes he was harassed by Paris Saint-Germain into attempting to sign a new contract in 2023. Can you imagine if that claim was upheld? It does have ramifications over how a club negotiates with a player. Do they have to go all very softly? They can't apply any pressure at all to stay?
Well, the harassment, it's linked to this issue where he was dropped from the team, dropped from the squad, left to train outside of it. In French, they call it being put in the loft. And they kept using this word loft in the press conference.
This is the rot in the reserves line, isn't it?
Yeah, the bomb squad.
The players' unions quite often sort of take up issues, don't they, if they think their players are being unfairly treated by a club. So, I mean, it's an interesting claim there by Mbappe's lawyers. And what was the social media, the Twitter aspect of the case?
Yeah, now this again, really interesting. It's stuff we've talked about here before in a broader sense. But another of the lawyers, this is a criminal lawyer who was also here, he said he's filed claims with a French court over harassment against people unknown, but all who've made these very, very, using his word, abhorrent attacks on Kylian Mbappé, his family, on Twitter and on Facebook. So he's also made complaints against the social media platforms, and it's quite topical when we talk about regulating these platforms.
It's far less toxic on LinkedIn and Substack, I believe. So you can follow us.
Well, let's see. Plenty of time for those to go south. But he made this other point as well, and he referenced an ongoing case against a former PSG employee, the former communications director there, and the purchase of what they called a digital army. He wanted to know if these cases, or this abuse that Mbappé and his family faced is linked to this army of trolls that were used allegedly by the former communications director to attack PSG players. Remember, including Lionel Messi and others in the past. So it just shows again the sprawling nature of all of this, what was announced in this press conference yesterday, and what's to come.
This reminds me of a scandal a few years ago when Barcelona were accused of hiring a company to create negative social media content targeting, apparently, Lionel Messi, something that was denied by Barca. This was about 5 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And, footballers and football people, they're kind of catnip, aren't they, for abuse on social media? Do you sense like the Mbappé people are saying, look, we are taking a stand here not just for him, but for football and footballers in general? Do you think because he has this much fame, the fact he has this much wealth, and they're willing to go to whichever ends they need to, do you think this could actually bring some sort of change?
I'm not sure, to be honest. It seems to me this is going to just end up being a dispute between one party and another, which I guess will eventually end in some sort of settlement. I can't see it having any sort of broader ramifications, to be honest. But I just what I think it leaves is this just realization of the incredible numbers, the incredible amount of money that players are getting paid.
Also a reminder how when we hear about how much contracts are worth, there are so many add-ons involved about achievements, about longevity of stays at clubs as well. And probably in the broader sense, it's going to be hard for general fans to sympathise with Mbappé, really, when such big numbers are involved, even though he feels very wronged by this.
Exactly. I mean, I was thinking about this when you look at this. You've got two sides. You've got this, Qatar mega project on one side, and you've got essentially a billionaire footballer now on the other side. If you think about how much this man might have accrued in he's only 26. But there's a real sad part to it as well in terms of what he represents. He's probably arguably France's most famous person, an icon of France. a boy from Paris, this breach and rupture between him and his city, maybe, and the club. And that was one of the points lawyers made, that they made sure to say he still loves PSG. He still is a fan of the club, and weirdly, so are all four of them, apparently. But, and that's the optics here as well, right?
Well, not the best of weeks for Mbappé. Real Madrid losing 3-0 at Arsenal, while Paris Saint-Germain were beating Aston Villa this week in the Champions League.
Well, it does save him, potentially, if Arsenal finish the job, a pretty awkward meeting, because guess who PSG would play in the next round?
Good point.
Well, we'll see how that case progresses. But also in the world of football finance, we touched on it last week, the Chelsea shenanigans with them selling off their women's team to the parent company. And what happens in England is the accounts of clubs get published on Companies House, and then we get different parts of the company releasing their accounts, parent companies, umbrella organisations. So we start to unfold more of the finances, don't we? So that's why this week we discover an incremental bit more information about that.
One is the accounts of a company called 22 Holdco, which that owns Chelsea women's team, and Strasbourg in the French league. And their accounts are just, to me, quite incredible in the scale of the losses. So in 2023 to 24, they lost £445 million. And the year before that, £653 million. So we're talking about, in 2 years, it's lost more than £1 billion for effectively a Premier League club, a French league club, and a women's club, which is just, remarkable as far as I'm concerned.
And an impressive season for Strasbourg. They're fourth in Ligue 1, which is now a Champions League place.
Yeah, but those numbers, they're extraordinary. If those are the only assets in there, Ziggs, you've said £1 billion over 2 years. Now, if someone is looking at this from the outside, Strasbourg is quite a small concern. Those losses, whatever they are, at that French club, even if they're competing for the Champions League, aren't going to be anywhere near the sums lavished on Chelsea. It does make you wonder, when clubs are moving money from one account to the other, using how they're ever going to pass financial fair play. And if I'm a fan of one of the 19 other Premier League teams, I will be wondering, how have you done this, guys, and what is the Premier League doing here? Because this kind of sounds nuts.
And Strasbourg Stadium, 26,000. Chelsea with only a 40,000 capacity. So we're not dealing with clubs in the group that have huge stadiums to bring in big match day revenue.
No, we're not. One of the reasons the losses are so big is we talked about before this, selling the women's team to a sister company. Now that the accounts came out just under a week ago, which showed that actually the valuation of that was £200 million. And they made £76 million from selling hotels to a parent company. Now, those cannot be registered as profit by the holding company. So that already is £250 million of loss, which for PSR purposes they can claim it, but they can't claim it for the holding company thing. So I think that's that's one reason. But you're right. Strasbourg, when they bought Strasbourg, I think they bought it for a little more than £70 million. And
Right, 3 women's teams with that, Ziggs.
Well, exactly. Get three Strasbourg for one Chelsea women's team.
We know that Chelsea are in talks with UEFA about a potential fine for breaching FFP, which leads to some questioning, how can they just get away with a fine? It puts us on a path of the long talked about policy, but never introduced by UEFA, of a luxury tax, which is something that exists in MLB, baseball in the United States.
It's this kind of settlement agreement that UEFA has as a first degree punishment. If it's your first run-in, we'll come to a settlement, and then you make a plan, and then if you then breach that, so then it does raise the question that if you're an owner and you've bought a team, would you not just take the hit, knowing that there's not going to be any big punishment for the first breach like this? But I'm also interested in what the biggest costs were in those losses. You mentioned that these hotels and these teams aren't going to be in there. But I assume it's the massive amount they've spent on players for Chelsea, not Strasbourg, and I guess the wage bill.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is the new football earnings rule that sort of rejigged FFP, and this will be the first time that clubs are going to be, I suppose, sanctioned or have a settlement. So, but it is laid down that the first breach is going to be a settlement. So, I think we can expect that. I think around 4 European clubs probably going to be in breach. I think Aston Villa probably going to be sailing close to the wind as well. But you're right, it is effectively a luxury tax, and maybe some people think that's a good thing.
So to be clear, we hear the phrase financial fair play a lot. It's no longer used by the Premier League. It's now officially out then with UEFA as well.
Yes. Football earnings rule or squad cost rule. There's two different financial rules.
Get up to date with the new lingo. But whatever you do, don't call UEFA a mafia. The governing body tried to fine the Norwegian club around €5,000 for chance of UEFA mafia at a Women's Champions League game recently, but it was overturned by CAS.
On what basis? Was this a sort of freedom of speech ruling?
Well, UEFA are saying in no way has CAS affirmed that freedom of speech could justify that so-called fans make offensive statements. But they're saying that the burden of proof needs to fall on UEFA to show that it is offensive and provocative. And certainly hearing from in and around UEFA, if you're Italian at UEFA, it is particularly offensive to be called part of a mafia.
Yeah, but it's about context, isn't it? I don't think, as looking at what the CAS judges said, they said there was a satirical intent to the chant and cannot be considered offensive or provocative, as the UEFA disciplinary charge stated.
There is a sense where some terms actually drift away from their initial sort of context and meaning, and they do convey different connotations.
I think context is key, and I suppose, for UEFA and protecting their brand, and for those people, the suits there, they don't like being described like that. But what I would say in terms of football bodies, whether it's UEFA or FIFA and the others, over the years, their own conduct as institutions has come under scrutiny, and it is upon them to improve their own image as well through conduct over time. It's not that long ago. Well, it feels not that long ago, where officials from the top of football, you were there, Rob, being dragged out of hotel rooms in Zurich. And that takes a long time for people to get over.
Yeah, that, of course, was FIFA, not UEFA, just point out. But I think people use mafia, especially in the sort of English language, as being a sort of gang or a sort of, a group of people, who operate together, not necessarily the sort of criminal connotations. But you can understand for some, especially Italian people working for UEFA, they might be very insulted by that. But I think in a sort of broader context, people use it in a much looser fashion.
Yeah, using a more flippant way. And fines over banners can be quite a money-making tool for UEFA. They did fine Borussia Dortmund last year, €35,000. That was over criticisms of the new look Champions League in the men's side of the game. That Dortmund banner did actually spell out the letters UEFA Mafia in yellow across the stand, and it was followed by "You don't care about sport, all you care about is money."
Fran has made the point. €5,000 for their women's team is a significant chunk of its budget. This is kind of a nascent team. It was formed from a merger, I believe, and it's just become quite successful. They've grown a fan base. They take 400 to 500 fans away now, and that hit is a significant one. And like the chairman there also made the point on the actual chant or the banner or whatever. He just said, in a world where freedom of expression is under pressure, this is an important, correct judgment. And I guess listeners will have different views on this.
I wonder if Dortmund will be trying to get their money back.
Well, maybe this has created a legal precedent.
Well, moving to the US then, it's been a busy week for both FIFA and the International Olympic Committee. The first meeting with Kirsty Coventry, co-chairing it effectively with Thomas Bach as we prepare for the handover of the reins at the IOC, has seen quite a landmark decision. There will be more quotas for female athletes than male athletes at the LA 2028 Games. And most notably, that means in football, they're flipping the competition. So instead of there being 16 men's teams and 12 women's teams, there will be 16 women's teams and 12 men's teams, something that FIFA has been pushing for.
Essentially confirming what Gianni Infantino said at the UEFA Congress in Belgrade. This is formalised now. Rob, these numbers that you mentioned, what does it mean in practice? So there'll be more female participants at the Olympics in Los Angeles than the males.
More quota places. So about 5,000 roughly each, although AP did some calculations in Paris when they claimed there was 50-50 gender parity. In fact, there still were more men that can be impacted by, I guess, withdrawals from competition. But certainly something that is notable. And in football, obviously, the men's competition is still predominantly an under-23s one with 3 overage players allowed, whereas the women's competition is any player. So it's a stronger competition, and they see the US as a better market for the growth of the women's game in 2028. And Tariq, you've made the point often about how developing more international competitions in women's football might be more advantageous for the growth of the game.
Yep, excellent.
In cricket, which is going to be a new Olympic sport in Los Angeles, they're going to have 6 men's teams and 6 women's teams. But it'd be interesting, the ICC's meeting at the moment, it'd be interesting if they decide on how those 6 teams are decided. Because say you have a host team and only 5 others, looks like you'll have a big cricketing nation missing out on the first Olympics.
Is it from the rankings? So if we look at the cricket rankings, who will be missing if the Olympics were tomorrow?
Well, let's do the rundown. In first place, in the men's T20 world rankings, India, pretty handy with the Ambanis, big backers of the IOC, and India hoping for the Olympics themselves.
And also, just the audience, because cricket is actually in the Olympics, essentially to draw that Indian audience, the passion and the interest from a nation of more than 1.5 billion people. That's why it's essentially there. So India are there. Who else, Rob?
Australia, England, New Zealand, and the West Indies, bringing us up to 5. So who would miss out?
Pakistan.
They would do in 7th. Number 6, South Africa.
Wow. That is huge cricket nation. Zeke, do you think they're going to really then, in the year that the Olympics are coming, the year before, do you think teams are going to go hell for leather to climb up those rankings then?
Well, I presume they'll try. And the other thing is whether, if they're a bit worried about that, they could use the T20 World Cup and where you finish in that to decide it. That's another possibility if they think the rankings is the wrong way to do it. But yeah, without Pakistan or South Africa, that would be surprising.
Well, certainly the IC hoping that cricket helps to grow their own audience, particularly in parts of Asia. Something Gianni Infantino said while welcoming the increase in the number of women's teams is they want more football to the Olympics, but futsal and beach soccer. That would seem very logical, wouldn't it? Although having 3 different football competitions would seem perhaps excessive, maybe.
Yeah, there's big questions about whether men's football, for example, should be at the Olympics at all. So I think if you had beach football or futsal, it should replace men's 11-a-side football.
Yeah, completely agree. And the issue of the Olympics, this issue of gigantism, or bloat, or whatever you want to call it, just chucking more and more things in without taking things away. It's just not going to work, is it?
The problem is 11-a-side football is the biggest ticket seller at any Olympics. So a lot of revenue that the Olympic Games are relying on from the main football competition. And obviously that's a big football focus in the United States in 2028. We know all about the next 2 summers, 2025 this year, the new Men's Club World Cup, next year, the 48-team main Men's World Cup as well. And John Infantino's been busy across the US this week. The MLS team owners have been meeting as well to discuss how they can potentially maximise the benefit of all this football happening in the US. One of the challenges for the league is the fact that they do run a season that doesn't align with the European main calendar. So it's not an autumn or fall to spring calendar. They're not starting in August, September, October. They do start around March time, which means normally when there's a major tournament going on, you've got MLS needing to take a break in the summer. But the commissioner, Don Garber, saying no change will come until 2027 at the earliest.
Yeah, the reason why they have that calendar is partly because it was a nascent competition and they needed these dates when the bigger US sports, if it's NFL in particular, when that isn't playing, you might have a window for attentiveness. Now, by changing it, it might be them saying, we've arrived. There is an audience for football, whether there's NFL or not. It's big enough.
So Gianni Infantino very much focused on FIFA tournaments in the United States, but a ruling has now paved the way to those long-anticipated official domestic league matches taking place in the United States.
Yeah, I think that's the last kind of legal handbrake is off here. This is the United States Soccer Federation and Relevant, the commercial entity based in New York that was trying to promote LaLiga games. They've come to an agreement. It seems there is now nothing to stop LaLiga or whoever to have a game in the United States. It would be now a case of who goes first and if there's going to be any cap.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be the Premier League. I think the fans wouldn't go for that. So who do you think? Serie A, La Liga?
La Liga will definitely be first out of the blocks.
Yeah, they've been champing a bit to get their Serie A chief executive. I think we've mentioned it on this pod. He's desperate to go there. But interestingly, no big games because there'd be a revolt, he said, if the Milan derby was to be played in the US. So, yeah. Do you think UEFA might consider it? Because they've got a very big deal with Relevant now, haven't they? They've given them the keys to the kingdom, sale of all of the European club competitions.
Well, when I asked Alexander Sheffrin about this in August during an interview, he said that games overseas were currently not on their agenda in terms of the finals. Slightly rowing back on what he said in one of his very first interviews as president to myself in 2016 when he opened the door to potential Champions League finals in the US. Is there an audience for the Club World Cup? Well, I think we've seen a slight shift in approach from Gianni Infantino this week. He's really been putting the miles in going around the US, having to sell the tournament in local markets to really make a push for ticket sales. He started in the last week at the Live Golf tournament at Trump's golf course.
I can't believe Gianni Infantino was at Trump's golf course at a Saudi Arabian sponsored tournament. Can you?
Well, listening to the quotes, I'm not sure is it tongue in cheek? He said he's at the best golf tournament in the whole sport the week of the US Masters.
Maybe the best 54-hole golf tournament.
That must be. We'll have to ask him when we get a chance to speak to him. We'll add that to the long list of questions. But you're right. He is the face of the Club World Cup, isn't he? He was there, that long interview on the sidelines of Live Golf, and he was in Charlotte, I think, and other places, trying to drum up interest in this. One thing I'm surprised by is it's a football administrator being the face of this competition. You know, like a guy in a suit. You haven't seen any other kind of footballers or celebrities or big names attached to this thing. This seems like I'm Gianni Infantino and here's my competition. It's going to be great. Buy tickets. Why is there not more around this? What are the clubs doing? Why are they not jumping in a bit?
Well, maybe you need that big figurehead to make the push. He's done a lot of media all across the US, so he's getting headlines in those local markets. And local news is big in the US, particularly on television. So he's getting eyeballs on him. And the Club World Cup's been sitting in the Oval Office all week as Trump's been making all those tariffs announcements.
4 weeks, but yeah, he's right there. But you said he's doing the rounds, but it's not working, is it? These tickets are just not selling. So maybe a different tack might be necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at some of the secondary ticket sites, and I mean, there is one strange thing. For example, I just picked up one match at random, the first knockout round in Miami match, and the official, the cheapest price for a ticket on the official ticket platform, Ticketmaster, was $86, but on a Viagogo, a secondary site, it was 25% less than that. Now, this isn't this is just shows, I think, basically that the demand isn't there, and someone's bought lots of tickets and is trying to get their money back any old how by offering them cut price. So you can see why there is a challenge for FIFA. But I do agree. Why haven't they got one of their ambassadors? The very well-known footballers doing this sort of promotion push.
Arsene Wenger, he'd be pretty good. Jill Ellis as well. They're both now on board at FIFA.
Well, Jill Ellis, I think, was in Charlotte at one of the road shows. I think it was in a pub with Infantino this week. But yeah, there's still a few weeks to go, I guess, and maybe people buy tickets later in the US. I can't imagine there's going to be big travelling support at this stage, especially given the news around visiting the United States at the moment.
Quite a gesture in California. Up to 30,000 tickets are going to be given to the first responders who dealt with those wildfires impacting Los Angeles, Pasadena and Altadena in January. 2 per first responder, Gianni Infantino said.
Yeah, nice move by FIFA there to reward those people. And, at least it means that you won't have so many empty seats in those stadiums.
It is addressing the empty seat issue early as well, and with legitimate people to fill it. It's interesting you talk about the prices coming down as well, because dynamic pricing is often maligned, but here we see how perhaps the consumer benefits because you can get tickets cheaper.
But it doesn't seem like this is dynamic pricing at all. Ziggs, correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about the secondary market. So people have attempted to think they're going to buy some tickets and they might try to profit from them, but here they're stuck with a bunch of tickets and they're trying to cut their losses maybe.
Yeah, this is dynamic pricing is when the official site sort of reduces the price or increases the price due to demand. This is the secondary. This is a sort of unofficial dynamic pricing, if you like, responding to the market.
Well, how to win over those host cities? What about with some cash? Because Infantino has pledged $1 million for each of the 11 cities that are going to be hosting Club World Cup matches. And one of the places that Infantino was in was Philadelphia. And while there, one of the friends of the pod from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Jonathan Tannenwald, did ask Gianni Infantino about one of the key contentious issues about whether or not all fans are going to get visas, particularly as immigration policy is front and center of the Trump and MAGA agenda.
I saw that you met with the FBI director and the attorney general yesterday at FIFA's offices in Miami.
Yeah.
A lot of the public have questions about visas, fan IDs, travel into and out of the United States between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico.
Yeah.
Could you give us an update on where your talks, FIFA's talks, have been with the Trump administration about visas and travel logistics and all those things for fans who are going to come here?
Well, as you know, we have excellent relations with President Trump, with the Trump administration. Yesterday, I had the honor of receiving in the FIFA offices in Miami the Attorney General and the Director of the FBI to again underline the collaboration that exists between FIFA and the United States of America government. It is absolutely crucial that we have this collaboration. I mean, by the way, as a side comment, something like this would never have been possible some years ago with the image that FIFA had. So we came back quite a long way, and today we work in a clear way, in a transparent way, in an ethical way, and we bring the world to the United States of America. And these are the guarantees that the United States government has signed at the time of the bidding, has reconfirmed, of course. Now the world will be welcomed in the United States of America this summer for the Club World Cup, next summer for the World Cup. There are discussions ongoing, of course, when you have 10 million tickets for sale between this year and next year, and million more of fans coming even without tickets, wanting to be here to feel the vibe of the World Cup. This creates, of course, a certain number of challenges that need to be addressed, and we are working very, very hard. And I would like to thank the Attorney General, the Director of FBI, the government, President Trump, everyone for their engagement. There is a White House task force which has been created for this purpose, also to coordinate between all the state agencies. This is quite special, I have to say. I'm in organizing events my whole life, and what we see here is special, but it has to be special because what we want to do here is to organize the greatest World Cup ever, which is not just a sports event, it's just the greatest event that the world has ever seen. Past, present, and future.
The biggest event in the history of the planet. Bigger than the creation.
These bombastic words like the biggest, the greatest, the best. Well, I don't know where he kind of learned all of this stuff. But listening to all of that, there were so many words he used to answer this question from Jonathan there. But unless I'm missing something, and you guys might have got it, was there anything concrete there that could answer the question about whether these fan IDs are there or how the visa process will work? Is it going to be easy for fans to get in? I'm not sure. Could you get a sense of anything in practice?
What it showed is he could navigate a challenging question, and doing media at least, he responded to the issue, even if we're still waiting for specifics.
It comes the week, or maybe in the month, where the record for filibustering was broken in the US Parliament. I think there was a Democratic politician, Cory Booker, who spoke, apparently, I have to check this, or someone else can, but for 25 hours.
It was exactly 24 hours and 18 minutes, the record filibustering in the Senate.
Apparently not to drink too much water.
Is that
official medical advice?
Official filibustering advice.
Is that so you don't need to take a leak break?
Yeah, exactly. You're not allowed. You're not allowed away from the chair. But yeah, I mean, what did you think? What do you think of his response? Ziggs, you've got a sense of what Infantino was saying there for fans around the world or teams who are planning to come to the US?
Yeah, I think it just shows that no agreement has been reached, and they remain hopeful. And this is one of the things that they're sort of being very cozy towards Trump, because they're trying to avoid a car crash when it comes to visas around visitors to the USA for the World Cup, because that could potentially be a big problem. So. But until an agreement is reached and they have some sort of, I mean, if like Russia, for example, in 2018 had some sort of thing where having a World Cup ticket was effectively a visa, wasn't it? So do they have that sort of thing as well?
I'd be amazed if the US allowed your ticket to be a visa like Russia and Qatar had done with the fan ID system.
Maybe it's hard to have a policy given we've just seen the whiplash change in policy over the last week over tariffs imposed, frozen, escalated in some countries, constant change. So maybe it's pretty pointless having a concrete position on it.
A very mercurial leader in Donald Trump. But a competition like the World Cup takes years to plan and almost needs perfect alignment to pull off as well. It's an enormous jigsaw puzzle that if things start moving out of place, the whole thing gets put at risk, but then you are in the hands of someone who could flip from one view to another in the space of a meal.
Well, for his take closest to the situation, Jonathan sent us this voice note from Philly after the encounter with Gianni Infantino to give his take.
When people talk about which U.S. cities are big international soccer destinations, they usually start with New York, Los Angeles, and Miami. Maybe Atlanta too, sometimes Chicago and a few others. Philadelphia hasn't always been seen as worthy of that group, but Lincoln Financial Field, the home of the NFL's Eagles, has become a regular stop for big games in recent years. You and your listeners have probably heard the most about the Premier League teams that visited over the last 2 summers, and there were a lot of things before then. And Philadelphia-based Comcast, Sky's parent company, as Rob knows well, has spent a lot of money on broadcast rights for the Premier League and Spanish rights for the World Cup. In fact, the company's headquarters is a few blocks from where I live. The Club World Cup and next year's Men's World Cup might be what finally changes Philadelphia's reputation in the world's eyes and, as importantly, in the city's own eyes. Gianni Infantino's visit here Thursday, part of a tour of the Club World Cup's 11 host cities, was his first time in town. Amid visits to the stadium, City Hall, and the public park that will host the 2026 World Cup Fan Festival, it seemed that he saw enough of the town to like it. There have been plenty of questions over here about the Club World Cup, though they've more been about just what it is than whether it matters. Philadelphia will host 8 games with teams here including Chelsea, Manchester City, Real Madrid, Juventus, and Flamengo. There will also be a round of 16 game and a quarterfinal, and those could bring Bayern Munich and Paris Saint-Germain, among others. And there will be 6 games in the World Cup here next year as well, including a round of 16 game on July 4th that a lot of people are already excited for. It was no surprise that Infantino spoke optimistically about Club World Cup ticket sales and his belief that stadiums will be full for games. As you all have talked about plenty, tickets aren't cheap, and Ticketmaster's dynamic pricing hasn't helped. There has not been much widespread marketing of the tournament, and that's something that matters here. The U.S. sports landscape is so crowded that no matter how big you are, you have to do the marketing work. Think about how much the NFL markets itself, even though it's so popular that it really barely has to, especially here in Philadelphia. If the NFL is doing that work, then all the other sports here have to follow, no matter how big they are, or they'll get drowned out, which they often already are. That all said, Chelsea Flamengo has some legitimate sizzle, and Man City and Real Madrid are always big draws. I think Juventus should get attention here too because it has 2 U.S. national team stalwarts on its squad. So we'll see what the crowds actually end up being. I asked Infantino about the growing concerns over visas for traveling fans. He said a lot more than I expected. I think I can thank you guys for getting me ready for that, if I may say so. Of course, he talked about FIFA's relations with the Trump administration, but he also openly acknowledged the scale of what's to come here. Not just fans with tickets, but those without them who just want to be in the World Cup's host country to take it in. Hopefully that means he and other FIFA officials know what they have to do and make a real effort at it. I can't guess how it will turn out, but then again, I do get told by readers to stick to sports. The one thing I'm sure of is this: if any of you come to Philadelphia along the way, I'll have plenty of restaurant recommendations for you. They should even pass muster with your expense departments. Best wishes to all of you from this longtime listener.
Thanks to that from Jonathan Tannenwald from the Philadelphia Inquirer. We do seem to discuss the Club World Cup a lot and Gian Infantino in the US, but it is such a big event. Well, as we've been told, it's the greatest event in the history of the world. So naturally, we're going to talk about it.
Maybe it'll boost some interest.
We're probably the only podcast in the world that mentions the Club World Cup every week. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a ticket promo through us as well.
Sport Unlocked, sponsored by Club World Cup dynamic tickets.
Yeah, the special discount code. Well, that's a lot of FIFA news. Let's go around some of the other headlines of the week. And in fact, this is something FIFA don't want to be talking about at all. We've been asking about it for the last few years. Just where is their policy at on gender eligibility? It is very contentious to some. It's very delicate, particularly in terms of where this policy ends up, particularly as we've seen some sports like World Athletics impose a global ban on transgender women and DSD athletes from competing in women's categories. But we have had a slight shift in policy from the English Football Association.
No announcement. This was quietly. So there have been issues and there have been campaigns and protests, but what they've decided to do is maintain the thing. You can play with reduced testosterone if you're a transgender woman, but the FA can intervene if there are concerns around safety or fairness of competition, and that is the sort of main change in the rules.
So that's even with the reduced testosterone. That's going to be a subjective call then, presumably, if you've followed all of the rules and someone says, hang on, I think this is unfair. Is that going to be, well, I'm not sure how many cases there are.
Yeah, I mean, there's only 20 or so registered transgender players, and they're all in amateur women's football, none in the professional game. So what would happen if the FA had concerns? It would intervene, and it would then go to a special committee who would determine the outcome about whether they should be able to continue to play.
What is unclear is if a player doesn't declare themselves as transgender, if the FA, probably at local level, would intervene to conduct their own checks, and indeed whether they're acting on people's own suspicions. It's why obviously athletics has ended up with this policy of what could be seen as sex testing for all female athletes, but obviously that would be impractical in something like grassroots and youth football in particular.
Yeah, absolutely impractical. It's a thorny issue.
Across to Brazil and some new revelations about the boss of their FA.
No, we talked about Ronaldo, the great Ronaldo, pulling out of an election challenge Edinaldo Rodriguez for the role of CBF president. And this article, really interesting article by a very respected magazine, POE, reveals one reason why he might have had no opponents. According to the article, Rodriguez increased by 200% the salary of regional FA heads from 50,000 reais to 215,000 reais. It might focus your mind when you are thinking about who to vote for. Pretty much the pork barrel politics we've been used to in Brazilian football. And also, it found that 49 people with no official connection to the organization were hosted on first-class trips and five-star hotels and tickets to Brazil's games at the 2022 World Cup. The group included congressmen, senators, judges, businessmen, socialites, singers, and guys, even journalists.
Well, I don't want to be too sort of scathing about the Brazilian FA, the CBF, but I think there's a sort of fairly long list of notorious figures who run that. Not all of them. And do you remember the 2014 World Cup? They gave all the FIFA Executive Committee members watches worth, was it £14,000? So, yeah, clearly they know the way to a man and a woman's heart.
All about money. Well, that's been the theme of things in the last week with the launch of the new Grand Slam track athletics event. It debuted in Kingston, Jamaica, this course being backed by Michael Johnson. $100,000 won by the Brit Matthew Hudson-Smith because he topped the rankings after winning the 200 metres and then being second in the 400 metres. Question is how much visibility this even had. Probably a issue to get into more in depth down the line, but didn't seem that notable in the UK, at least, where we're watching from.
They've been planning for this for ages. I didn't see anything on socials either, whether, they had maybe a TV contract here but you didn't notice anything, did you?
No, the promotion wasn't great. I think it was in the UK, it was on TNT Sport. I think one of the problems was the shortness of time of the actual event. So on Monday, for example, the event lasted for 2 hours and 20 minutes or thereabouts, and there was only 9 minutes of actual action during all that time. That's a hell of a lot of empty space to try and fill.
Well, I've not heard much from them PR-wise. We have heard from UK Athletics and their chief executive, Jack Buckner, saying they've actually rejected a chance to host one of the legs of the circuit. They lost £400,000 on the Diamond League alone, so they're concerned that this new event just wouldn't necessarily bring in the revenue, and they've got questions at this point over its sustainability and not too sure if the format works or the timings at all of it.
I actually interviewed Matthew Hudson-Smith about this last year, and in some ways it sounded really good, but I think they probably needed to get on board with the World Athletics and maybe join up, make the Diamond League better somehow, rather than doing this, because it's effectively a kind of rival event, and I'm not sure there's enough interest in athletics globally for a rival event.
Fortunately for them, an event that maybe seemed a rival has had to be postponed. There was due to be a half marathon in Beijing involving humanoid robots against human runners.
Well, the robots failed a fitness test, did they?
Strong winds, and as Reuters report, it wasn't clear if the conditions were more of a danger to the robots or the humans, but it did say that the humanoid robots could be at more risk of tipping over in windy weather.
Brilliant.
All fully human on this pod. Remember, you can message us at sportunlockedpod@gmail.com. We're now on LinkedIn, on Substack, all the other social platforms you want to send your thoughts and ever. If you hit subscribe, it lands in your feeds automatically. But for now, thank you for listening.